Good Wednesday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock, time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. A little later in the show, Zack Meisel from The Athletic will be along. We'll talk Guardians baseball, getting ready for the spring training opener down in Arizona this weekend. We begin, though, by talking Browns. So take a look. Some of the free agent quarterbacks that were available last year. Aaron Rodgers at $50 million. Russell Wilson went to the Broncos at $49 million a year. Deshaun Watson, of course, came to the Browns, $46 million a year. Kyler Murray stays with Arizona at $46 million a year. The question that I have, which of these do you think the franchise regrets most? Which do you think would do it all over again if given the opportunity? Let's welcome in Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast. So, Jeff, in retrospect, looking at it, do you think the Browns would do that deal again to get Deshaun Watson? And of those four, who do you think would want to do over?
I think if you look at it this way, and you just look at it from where each of these franchises are in, the situations they are in, the Browns haven't really gotten the Deshaun Watson experience yet. So, he misses 11 games last season. The 6-game stretch of what we saw of it, I mean, I think we all expected a little more. We all think there's going to be more coming. You look at two of the situations, Kyler Murray. There is now a new head coach with the Arizona Cardinals, Russell Wilson. There is now a new head coach with the Denver Broncos. With anybody you speak to, it seems that Aaron Rodgers' days with the Green Bay Packers are over. So I think if there's one team that at least says, hey, we don't know where our situation is at as far as the lofty extension that was given, I think it's the Cleveland Browns. The Packers, it's going to be a tough decision because, one, if you're okay now to move on to Jordan Love, why weren't you essentially maybe ready to do that 1 year ago? It's not like Jordan played and anything's really essentially changed with Jordan Love. And the Broncos and the Cardinals, look, you have Kyler Murray coming back off a knee injury. ACL, God knows when his availability will be for the 2023 season. And the Denver Broncos got a quarterback that they thought was, going to continue the lineage of great players at the position for them, and got the absolute worst of Russell Wilson. And now you do bring in a solid head coach there, but, is the solid head coach there to get Russell Wilson right, or to show that his system is better than what Russell Wilson can do? So for me, it's probably the Cardinals. It's probably the Broncos. The Packers really didn't have a choice for everything Aaron Rodgers has done for that franchise. They kind of were painted into a corner. But for Denver and Arizona right now, there are a lot more questions than there certainly are answers.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind, Deshaun Watson is 27 and Russell Wilson is 34. So there's that aspect of it as well. All right, this is from the 33rd team. That's former NFL executives, players. Way too early 2023 quarterback rankings. Mahomes 1, Jalen Hurts 2, Joe Burrow 3, Josh Allen 4. Garoppolo 21, Andy Dalton 22, Russell Wilson 23. They have Deshaun Watson at 24. Watson is also behind Geno Smith, Brock Purdy, and Ryan Tannehill. Seems awfully low, and I'm not defending the way Deshaun Watson played last year. Let's see what happens when he has an entire offseason to prepare, and Kevin Stefanski builds an offense around him.
No, look, I mean, obviously, you see a list like that, you see some of the names on it. The first thing that says to me is, obviously, how down are you on Deshaun Watson? And is it all about what is on the field? Because some players that you have above him have never even come close to the success that Deshaun Watson has had at times in his career. Yes, are there questions about this Browns offense? And, now that we're going to change things, does that necessarily bode well? Does that mean this offense is going to get significantly better? They're fair questions to ask. But when you start saying, Deshaun Watson is below some quarterbacks on the, like Andy Dalton, I mean, it just seems like sometimes, and look, I know the legitimacy of the 33rd team. I certainly do. But, there's also a lot of talk of this time of year is, if you're going to put out content, you basically got to find a reason that maybe somebody's going to be interested to digest it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So word out of Tennessee, and we'll have more on this, but some cap casualties that might be of interest to the Browns. Like I said, we'll get to another one here in a minute, but the Titans released Robert Woods. It's an older wide receiver, Any interest, do you think, in the Browns in bringing a guy like Robert Woods into the fold?
With any of these guys, and the first thing, everybody's been doing this. Anytime, a veteran wide receivers come on, and whether it's Nuke Hopkins, whether it's Keenan Allen. And look, a lot of these guys, the age and the wear and tear is there. Robert Woods certainly is. Robert Woods is not going to get paid like a DeAndre Hopkins. Robert Woods is not going to get paid like a Keenan Allen. Robert Woods is interesting because if you get down to where maybe you say it was 1 year, $5 million, highly incentive laden, and if you're the Browns, you're looking at a room after Amari Cooper, after Donovan Peoples-Jones, and saying, look, there's maybe, in our opinion, promise, but obviously nothing's been proven to this point. There is a lot of uncertainty within the room. You can see within the fan base, everybody wants to add to the wide receiver room. And a guy like Robert Woods, a couple of his last games in Tennessee, one game 4 for 40, another game 5 for 39. This has always been a big, explosive, vertical wide receiver. The pairing would be there, certainly. You do have some pause and hesitation as Robert Woods has missed a ton of time over his career. But if their deal was, monetarily favorable for the Cleveland Browns, I'm not sure that's something that they would necessarily not be interested in. Robert Woods has put up some really good numbers in his time in the NFL when he was in the right system and he was healthy.
Yeah, I would agree. Along those lines, we're going to take a look at some more wide receivers. NFL free agency market. These are guys that haven't quite lived up to the expectations and might be worth taking a second chance on. That's the second draft shots. Mecole Hardman underwent surgery, allegedly a successful surgery, but they never say it's unsuccessful surgery. We know that. Paris Campbell, Darius Slayton. There's another tier of these that we want to look at too. Speed Demons, and that's Marquez Callaway, Scotty Miller, Jalen Guyton, Deontay Hardy, Marquise Godwin, and T.Y. Hilton. So any of those have an interest to you? I think we've talked in the past. Campbell is intriguing to me. I'd like that fast, twitchy guy that can be kind of an easy button for Deshaun Watson.
I think Paris Campbell probably carries a bigger name as far as, guys who can do that type of thing. I think Mecole Hardman, to this point, throughout their NFL careers, has been a guy who's probably proven more. Injury history has probably been more in his favor. And you can see, with Mecole Hardman, obviously, jet motion, those types of things, the things the Browns want to put into their offense, just, something else to keep something guessing. If it's going to be a run to Nick Chubb, worried about the tight end, worried about Donovan Peoples-Jones, worried about Amari Cooper. Intriguing names all around there. Both of those guys, for me, Mecole Hardman over Paris Campbell, definitely. Darius Slayton, and it's interesting, the Giants, who are so, void right now of talent at the wide receiver position, that they necessarily wouldn't be so interested in keeping one of their own. But Darius Slayton has, had some big games in his career. He's had some big catches in his career. He would be playing with a quarterback on a talent level that he has never played with to this point in his career. Any of those first three names are really, really interesting. When you get to that other list of the speed burners, obviously, T.Y. Hilton well past his prime, Goodwin well past his prime. Other guys either coming from teams that played in a dome or teams that played in Florida in much better favorable weather situations. For me, with Hardman, Campbell obviously coming from Ohio State, Slayton really just a versatile wide receiver who's good. Maybe never a guy who was a 1 or maybe even a 2, but maybe a 2A type of guy. That first list of those three guys, all of those guys definitely solid players. But it's going to be interesting the way the market works this year because there is not a lot of big names. So does that mean for the lower names who are basically now the top end of the class, is the price range for those guys going to be something that maybe the Browns just don't feel comfortable, tipping their toes in that water?
Yeah, it will certainly be worth taking a look at here. In about a month is when that will get rolling.
3 weeks.
Yep. All right, before we head to a quick break, let's go to the voicemail of Truth and Reason for the first time today.
Yeah, hi, this is Ron from Cleveland. I was checking out some of the wide receivers that we possibly could bring in, and one guy came to mind that I haven't heard anything from since he got in trouble last year, and that's Calvin Ridley. I know we were interested in him last year, and he had the trouble with I believe a betting incident or something, and I don't know if he's out of the league, if he has to reinstate himself or what the deal is, but I don't know if you guys have heard anything, but I'd like to know what you think about that. Thanks a lot. Love you guys, and as always, go Browns. Woof.
Appreciate all of voicemails. So, Jeff, he got traded to the Seahawks. I saw he did.
Jaguars.
I'm sorry, the Jaguars. He did reapply for reinstatement as well earlier this week. So the Jaguars traded for him with the same idea of kind of holding on to him. I don't think he's going anywhere, but he did reapply for reinstatement earlier this week.
Well, you look at the situation in Jacksonville, this is a team that made the playoffs. They got great contributions, whether it was Marvin Jones, Evan Engram, Christian Kirk. These guys excelled. So to have an asset that they know they can get their hands on, obviously he's got to go through, the hoops of getting cleared after his 1-year suspension. Even at the time when it first happened, Calvin Ridley, look, he's always been a player from the South. With the Falcons, played in a dome. Now he's playing in South Florida. Again, a guy whose game I don't necessarily know was going to translate so well into Northeast Ohio. Certainly was once a great talent. There's no question about it. And, as long as he's got, his head on straight and he can get through this next process through the NFL, should be a big get for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who had an extremely successful season. And now you bring into the fold, a guy who's already had, a couple 1,000-yard seasons throughout his NFL career.
Yeah, and that was a sneaky trade deadline deal by the Jaguars to kind of get him and hang on to him. Jeff, Lloyd and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Take a look at some free agents that Dog Pound Daily feels will boost the Browns' Super Bowl chances. Sports4CLE will be right back.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast and I continue talking Browns. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Yeah, hi. This is Ron from Cleveland, and I wanted to call up and say a few things about Teller possibly being traded. We're going to possibly lose Pickett, and that really doesn't bother me because we have basically the offensive line whisperer in Bill Callahan. He can take a good player and make him elite. So if we could get some players, a couple defensive pieces that we need maybe in a trade or draft choices, I think it'd be perfectly great because we have the man and he can transform a good player into an elite player in a spring. So tell me what you think about that. And as always, love your show and go Cleveland. Woof.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Jeff, Again, it's got to come down to the evaluation they have of Wyatt Teller. You want to get rid of a player a year too soon rather than a year too late. And you can't be paying all 5 of your offensive linemen in double-digit millions. And that's kind of where this offensive line is headed.
I do differ a little bit as far as everybody who's going to get paid in double digits. But the thing, and, by saying Bill Callahan is the offensive line whisperer, the Browns made the move for Wyatt Teller in August of 2019. This was still a John Dorsey regime. The mistake the Browns made during 2019 was not starting Wyatt Teller to about week 8 or week 9. They kept doing this revolving door at right guard. They finally played Wyatt Teller, and he held it down. Yes, did he have a great offseason leading into the 2020 COVID season and have a great year with Bill Callahan as coach? Yes. But how much did Bill Callahan do? You got to keep in mind when he was hired, these guys didn't really do anything until training camp. So it's not like, he took Wyatt Teller, who was this guy who played well in 2019, and turned him into a superstar within 3 weeks. The other thing is, everybody, if Wyatt Teller wasn't maybe down somewhat in PFF rankings right now, would we be talking about trading him? Most likely no. So then the other caveat to that is, why is everybody going to come get Wyatt Teller if he hasn't played so well in the second half of the 2022 season, the 2021 season? It's easy to move on from things, but there has to be somebody who potentially wants them. I do agree, though, we're getting close to where the rubber is going to meet the road financially for this offensive line. I know the Browns really, really would like to be able to keep Ethan Posick in the fold. I differ from others. And I know it came out yesterday, and Mary Kay Cabot pretty much said she thinks it's a slam dunk that Jedrick Wills' fifth-year option is going to be picked up. I'm not ready for that. Some things I've talked about, that if they are ready to do that, the things I've heard about is that free agency didn't necessarily go this year the way the Browns thought it would if they'd be in. Because the things I've kind of heard is if free agency goes well for the Browns this year, they're going to be in a position where they might not necessarily have any option where they can even pick up Jedrick Wills' contract. But look, you've got a very, very expensive left guard. You've got a very, very expensive right guard. You are going into the fourth year of a number 10 overall selection at left tackle, and you just extended more money to Jack Conklin at right tackle. There's a lot of money there. There truly is. And if you could find a way to fill some holes elsewhere, that's certainly possible. But, if you're going to do this and you're going to feature Nick Chubb and you're going to feature Deshaun Watson, I'm not sure they're ready to rip that apart yet. And the other thing is, Wyatt Teller's contract extension at this point is probably about 16 months old. So I'm not sure if they're ready that quickly to reverse course on that.
Yeah, those are all fair points. This is from Dog Pound Daily. 3 free agents the Browns should sign to boost their Super Bowl odds. Linebacker T.J. Edwards, last year's leading tackler on the NFC champion Eagles. Deron Payne, defensive tackle, would instantly shore up Cleveland's defensive line while forming one of the NFL's most formidable pass rush duels with Myles Garrett. And Mecole Hardman, we've talked about him. Chiefs likely to move on from the speedy former second-round pick. When you look at those, and we'll talk a little bit more about Payne early on, I guess Edwards would make sense. You want guys that Jim Schwartz fits what he's going to ask them to do.
Well, the issue with T.J. Edwards is going to command money. The Cleveland Browns don't necessarily pay their linebackers money. Anthony Walker didn't make much money last year. Obviously, the veterans you brought in late in the season, they were not making much money. Phillips on his rookie deal. Taki was still on his rookie deal. JOK still on his rookie deal. Everybody wants to talk about how the big needs are at the defensive line and whether or not there's going to be a big hole opening up at free safety. Where is this money coming from? T.J. Edwards is probably going to command $7 million, $8 million. And this regime, through and being consistent in 3 years now, they have not paid a linebacker to this point. It started, Joe Schobert was going into free agency as this regime was in its infancy. Joe Schobert had been essentially done wrong by the previous regime and was promised that his contract extension would get done. That never came to pass. The new regime told Joe, we just don't see it. We just don't value linebacker monetarily that high. So he ended on better terms with the new regime that he essentially never played for. But in 3 years, this team has not showed any commitment to paying money, big money to the linebacker position and look, it could be a little bit different this year. As we know, Joe Woods had a fondness to trying to get to nickel and dime as quickly as possible. But I don't think that, as far as free agency and big money, that's something they're going to commit to any linebacker. And if they do at some point in time, it will hopefully be to one of their own. Yeah,
and you can say the same thing about defensive tackle as well, Deron Payne. Along those lines, Pro Football Talk tweets this out. Before the franchise window tag window closes, 99.9% likely that the Commanders will tag defensive tackle Deron Payne. So he's not getting to free agency, as most people said. And then the other one, there's a void date on Dalvin Tomlinson's contract, which is March 15th. That's another guy to listen out for. Again, those are kind of the things that find guys that contract aren't being renewed that you can get value on. Andrew Berry's been pretty good at that.
Yes, and the thing with Deron Payne, and the week that the Browns played the Commanders, obviously I had a lot of back and forths, and a lot of appearances on my show with people doing Commanders coverage, and a lot of people felt at the time the tag was going to be the way it was going to go. Deron Payne obviously put up a monster season, but the Washington Commanders themselves, were maybe a little bit leery to ready to go into a big long-term deal because his numbers this year kind of exceeded the production he had put out in years past. So you always get nervous with that guy who has that 1 year breakout. Is it the breakout or, the guy just basically strike oil during his free agency season? So that is certainly a concern there. And I honestly think the Commanders would be more than comfortable just paying the franchise tag this year, not even committing to a long-term extension this year. Tomlinson's an interesting one. There, because with the Browns, and I know you said we're going to get to this a little later. This isn't maybe necessarily about number 1 or number 2 on this list. This is about the guys maybe anywhere between 3 and 11. Because, you just don't want to take this money and say maybe the Browns have $25 million that they can commit to guys on the defensive side of the ball. I doubt by any means necessary they want to commit $19 million and then basically go have to look at 4 or 5 other guys for $1 million apiece. It's just not how it works. It just doesn't seem very feasible.
Yeah, I would agree with you wholeheartedly, and we will get to that in just a little bit. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out on the side of the break. We'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason, talk a little bit about special teams coach. Browns looking for a new one. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students, kindergarten through 12th grade, can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. We continue talking Browns with Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Looking at the coach that we got from college, the Utah State defensive coordinator, as our safeties coach, he had that defense and that secondary looking good. I see the alignment of what Jim Schwartz wants to do, which is man press and do a lot of what the Eagles like to do defensively and schematically. And I think he could help our secondary really, really well. And this is just really, really good to see that he has an understanding of what we want to do, how we want to play, and things like that. So, yeah, go Browns.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Jeff, I don't know much about Coach Banda. I'm assuming that Jim Schwartz liked what he saw and thinks he can fit into what the Browns want to do along with Kevin Stefanski.
Certainly. And I think the first thing, until you do your homework, everybody says, oh, you're bringing somebody in from Utah State. There was at one time where Banda was a co-defensive coordinator at the University of Miami. Miami, maybe the shine off of the star of that program, of course. But, that big-time job to be had at one point. But here's a guy who loves to come in, likes to play aggressive. And I think coming from the college ranks, this probably isn't a terrible idea right now for the Cleveland Browns. You need some guys to come in that are going to be different voices. And it's so weird. And, I know everybody, the Browns coaching staff, it's so unheard of for a coaching staff to remain together for 3 years in the NFL. And to be frankly, it's not necessarily the best of things. That means nobody was interested in taking your coaches. Nobody was interested in promoting them. Now, after a second season of not reaching the playoffs, the Browns had some decisions to make. They've made them. You bring in a guy like Jim Schwartz, who comes in and obviously has been a really, really solid guy as a defense coordinator in this league for years. But now you're showing that you're going to bring in some guys that maybe are a little bit different and guys who can maybe rally the troops, fire the guys up a little bit, as he is, one of the new voices as he's going to come in and coach the safeties. And most likely there's going to be some turnover within that room. So basically, here you go. You get to start with Grant Delpit. We're going to get you some other pieces, but go ahead, make it work.
The other thing is Mike Prefer let go earlier this week. Bubba Ventrone is scheduled to have an interview with the Browns today. So Ventrone, former Browns special teams captain back in 2011-2012, has been the special teams coordinator for the Colts. And when we look at what he has done there, you see why the Browns are interested in him. These are Pro Football Focus ratings for Ventrone's special teams. he went up 1 year. The first year he was there, second year went from 5th to 21st, then first, tied for second, tied for fourth. Jeff, when you talk about the Browns special teams just have to be better. They have been a negative the past couple of years.
In your special teams, it can never be negative. Nobody ever wants to talk about special teams. And it seems the only time anybody wants to talk about special teams is when it costs you ball games. The New York Jets game, week 2. The fact that Mike Prefer, wasn't able to, get Cade York from a strong beginning to a strong finish, but wasn't able to get him out of that funk that he hit in the middle of the season quicker. Also, this was a situation where I think the Browns, were interested in possibly, making a change there. But until staffs start to change and new hires come in and new regimes are born, necessarily, guys aren't fruit shaken off the tree. Now with a guy like Ventrone, new head coach in Indianapolis, and even, I think I want you here this year, but, obviously I have friends all over. I have friends in Philly that maybe I just can't get him here yet. So maybe your position isn't safe. The Browns are also bringing in Anthony Blevins today as well. So these guys start to become shake-free. And for a guy like Ventrone, look, he's been here. He's played for this organization, brings him a little bit closer to home, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania native. And for a guy like Ventrone, for me, one of the most appealing things is, here was a guy, undrafted free agent, out of Villanova, a great program at its level, but not known as an NFL powerhouse. And when he speaks, and if anybody's got anything to say, do you know what it takes to be a player in the NFL for a decade? And as an undrafted free agent, and you're making your living playing special teams, a guy like Ventrone, he's going to open his mouth. Guys are going to listen. And obviously it certainly doesn't help, that his first gig was, he was a former Patriot. Once he was done with his playing days, the Patriots brought him in right away. If anybody remembers, he went to the Colts as part of a Josh McDaniels staff that Josh McDaniels never showed up to coach with. But you can make this move and get a guy like this in here. And I think, again, with Prefer, it just ran its course. It was 3 years. It wasn't ever excellent. It wasn't actually ever the worst. And I do think there were some signs this year. Jerome Ford returned the ball well as a kickoff returner. I think Donovan Peoples-Jones, once he grew more confident in his abilities as a receiver, you saw the return game aspect pick up like it was when he was a player at Michigan. But I think overall, coverage units, things of that nature, here's a guy that they're a little bit more familiar with. They're a little bit more comfortable with. And if you can make a change and you feel the change you made is better than the guy who was there before, you're foolish not to do it.
All right. Before we go to break, we talked a little bit earlier about the fifth-year option for Jedrick Wills. Mary Kay thinks it's a no-brainer. We'll see how that shakes out. Along those lines, though, this is a redraft of the 2020 draft by The Athletic. And you see they have the Bengals taking Herbert number 1 ahead of Burrow. Not sure that would necessarily happen. Burrow going 2, Wirfs going 3, Andrew Thomas going 4. They have Jedrick Wills going 7th, and the Browns taking C.D. Lamb. So it's just interesting that Wills hasn't really lived up to that, but an independent guy that's not Cleveland-related, Cleveland-centric, redrafting thinks Wills goes before number 10. Again, it's kind of all relative to what you're seeing. Wills hasn't been what the 10th pick in the draft should be, but he is not one of the worst left tackles in football either.
No. And look, for Jedrick Wills to have maybe not progressed, and look, the Browns are not blameless here. You drafted a guy who played right tackle.
Yep.
With the sole purpose of making and asking him to play left tackle. So if it didn't work out or he hasn't hit the way you thought he would hit, well, you basically, you bought a scratch-off ticket. You had no idea what was underneath. So that's where, for me, it gets difficult. And do I see this meteoric rise in Jedrick Wills from rookie year to year 2 to year 3? I don't. I'm not necessarily condoning that, he shouldn't be here anymore, but to tell me that you're comfortable paying him $14 or $15 million in 2024, I'm not. And, everybody now, oh, well, it's 14, 15 million. Well, I mean, 14, 15 million dollars, that gets you a rock solid edge player. That gets you a rock solid defensive tackle. That could get you one of the best free safeties in the game. So you're telling me that Jedrick Will's play to this point is on par with that? Jedrick Wills, what you pay, Jadeveon Clowney had 9.5 sacks in 2021. The Browns upped his salary to $14 million this year. Granted, it didn't work out, but the impact Jadeveon Clowney had in 2021, you're going to tell me that is now commensurate to the level of play of Jedrick Wills to this point in his career? I'm just not buying it. I just don't see it. And if they're going to do it, I mean, anybody who seems that they're okay with it, you're not going to be okay with it when you see the type of player that you are no longer going to have on your team because you committed what seems to be not much money in $14, $15 million to a left tackle who most people say it's okay, he's average. If it's average, I'll go draft that in the second round in 2024.
No, those are all very fair points, and that's kind of the way you have to weigh it. What can you get relative to that $14.5 million?
I could get average. in the second round of the NFL draft.
Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast and I are going to step aside, take one more time out. We will continue talking Browns football. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast. Relative to Jeff's point before we went to break, take a look. The Titans are parting ways with Taylor Lewan. Tore his ACL second week against Buffalo. It's the second ACL the last 3 years. He was limited to 20 games the last 3 seasons, but he's a 3-time Pro Bowler, and his cap hit was about $14.5 million. So that's kind of relative to your point. 14.5 should get you a lot more. That's kind of the cap number with Lewan. It'll be interesting to see if he comes back, if he's somebody that the Browns try to sign on an incentive-laden thing. It's not clear if he wants to try to rehab to the point where he plays in the NFL again.
Well, Taylor Lewan, there's a couple of things. Now, if we all remember when Joe Thomas, retired, what was the first thing he was talking about? It was the grueling maintaining. And Joe had such fortunate health up until the final snap of his NFL career. Taylor Lewan, totally different type of story. And also Taylor Lewan has some, Pat McAfee to him. This could be something that he pursues. And guys like, me and you, Dave, we could be in a little bit of trouble if, more guys like Taylor Lewan step into this type of work. But now to, go through the rehab of a second ACL. He's made a ton of money. Do you just maybe go somewhere you've always wanted to go to? Do you go to a certain locale, or you have a friend or two in this league, that you've always wanted to try to sync up with for, a season? I don't think this is a move for the Browns. I don't that he's going to come here and you make a move with Jedrick Wills, because now you're talking Conklin coming back from injury. You're talking about Taylor Lewan. Then you're dealing with possibility of Nick Harris at center. That's a lot of question marks about a guy coming off an injury. But he was a guy who was a great, great player in his day. And kind of interesting that, the Titans are moving on from him at $14.5 million. But Browns fans seem okay with giving $14.5 million to a guy who has never reached the player of the top of Taylor Lewan.
All right, going back to the defensive line. So if the Browns can find a way to clear $20 million in cap space, what would Javon Hargrave give them? Played under Schwartz, 40 quarterback hurries, 30 run stops in 2022. So this brings us to the question that we talked about a little bit briefly earlier. I personally wouldn't do $20 million with one guy. I'd rather spread it out over 4 or 5 because I don't think this defensive line is one player away from being a really good defensive line. And with Jim Schwartz, you need a good defensive line. I think you're kind of in the same boat. You'd rather do 4 or 5 guys, spread that 20, 25, whatever it is, over multiple guys and improve the group.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Is this defense a defensive tackle away from being the top 10 defense we thought they were going to be in 2022? There's no way. No way whatsoever. And now you look at it from the Philadelphia Eagles perspective. The Eagles have 4 defensive tackles who are free agents this year. They spent their first-round pick last year on rookie Jordan Davis. But you have Hargrave. You have Fletcher Cox. You brought in Ndamukong Suh. You brought in Linval Joseph. Hargraves was the youngest of that group. Hargraves was the best of that group. That's really, really difficult competition to get him out of there. But you pay him $20 million. You are now to, Mr. No Name as your other defensive tackle. You don't have money for another edge. If you are going to move on from John Johnson III, you don't have money for a free safety. And you're going bargain basement all the way, the rest of the way around. It doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't make the most sense towards a recipe for success. Also, I don't think you hired Jim Schwartz and said, okay, so you're telling us we just need a defensive tackle? Because I'm sure Jim Schwartz came here with the thought process that this defense needed some work and it needed more than one defensive tackle. You have a great one of the top edges in the entire NFL in Myles Garrett. But after that, you have guys who aren't there yet or unproven in Alex Wright, in Isaiah Thomas. This needs to be one where you kind of got to piecemeal it, and you kind of got to satisfy everybody here.
Yeah, and when you look at some of the names that you're potentially talking about, it's guys like Marcus Walker. He's got the ties to Jim Schwartz in Tennessee. Nade from Kansas City. Tomlinson, who we've talked about. Fletcher Cox. Ashawn Robinson. Ingram. Lorenzo Carter. Kwan. There are guys out there that are in the price range that we're talking about that, in theory, will be very effective. The other thing, Jeff, is I think about this, and every time we mention it, with Myles Garrett playing the edge, your defensive tackles, if they win their one-on-one battles, the quarterback's running into them because they're stepping up to get away from Myles Garrett.
Oh, no, I could not agree with you more. And, as I was talking with Brian, the producer today, and we were putting together some names that I'm interested in. Some of these games are, do you do one aspect well as opposed to the other? Derek Nande is a strong guy in run. So guess what? Derek Nande does his job on either first or second down. He's getting off of the field. A guy I like in DeMarcus Walker didn't really come together much for him in Denver, got down to Tennessee. But the thing with a guy like DeMarcus Walker is he can play edge in first down situations. He can move inside on obviously pass rushing situations. That's a guy that brings you double value, double versatility. Ogmanaya Okoronkwo, he has been a guy, and what did he do? Whether it was Von Miller or Aaron Donald, he was a guy that found a way to eat and feast, basically, being one of the backup dancers to a star. So you have the opportunity for a guy like that here. But these are guys and these lists of names where you're saying, okay, maybe it's $5 million here. Maybe it's 4.5 here. Maybe it's 3 here. And I just got 3 defensive linemen for the price, maybe even less than what it would take to bring in a guy like Hargraves. Fletcher Cox is going to be interesting because if it comes down to he and the Eagles decide it's over because they have the kid, they want to keep Hargraves. Fletcher Cox obviously has a really, really strong relationship with Jim Schwartz. And this is something you look for when you do hire a guy like Jim Schwartz, is that guys could become available who have a history with him. And when they sit down and talk to him and say, look, it'll be 20 to 25 reps a week. We're going to make it easy on you. We're going to make your spring light. We're going to make your summer light. It's all about being ready to go week 1. And a guy like that can truly believe it because he's been with this man before. He knows what he tells him and he can believe that it's factual. You could get, some way where Fletcher Cox and you bring in one of those 2 other guys. Now you're talking about a defensive line room with depth and diversity, guys who are strong versus the run, maybe guys who are stronger versus in pass rush. And that's how you put it all together. I'm not sold or done yet on Perion Winfrey, Alex Wright, Isaiah Thomas. I think those guys are all still capable. And I think we also have to look at the fact, as much as we all talk about Bill Callahan, we need to kind of maybe think about that same thought process here with the Jim Schwartz and a guy like Perion Winfrey and a guy like Alex Wright and a guy like Isaiah Thomas. where their play should get better now that they are playing for an upper echelon coach.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. So I guess the bottom line is don't get caught up on the names. Let's see what the skill set of each of these guys is that they're bringing in.
I don't need a Maserati. I'll take 3 or 4 Toyota Camrys, Dave. I really will. I think it'll suit the team best, and it'll also allow for the fact that, we all know in the NFL there's weeks where so-and-so's not going to make it. He's down this week. And you do that in a situation and you think you have 4 really good players. I don't need 4 great players. I'd rather have 8 or 9 good players that I can rotate in and out, basically due to game situation, due to health, all that type of stuff. I'd rather have a nice rotation of players than to say I've got some headliners.
Jeff Lloyd, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Jeff.
All the best, Dave. Always appreciate our chats.
All right, Jeff Lloyd, check him out, Locked On Browns podcast. We turn our attention to the Guardians. Joining us from Arizona, Zack Meisel, Guardians beat reporter for The Athletic. Straight ahead on Sports4CLE. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students, kindergarten through 12th grade, can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. Sports4CLE continues. We turn our attention to the Cleveland Guardians getting ready to open spring training this weekend down in Arizona. Terry Francona talked about building on last year's success with that young core, as well as a new thing, the pitch clock, and just how he wants his young pitchers to deal with it.
Last year is, from the very beginning, we kind of said, hey, okay, the elephant in the room is we're really young. Are we going to let it be an excuse to not win? And ultimately, what matters is what they think in the room. What the opinions outside the room. I don't want to say we don't respect it, but it doesn't really help or hurt us. Or if it does, shame on us. What really matters is how we feel, and that, to me, that's going to be the same exact thing as last year. The thing that made it exciting, I think, is the way they played the game. Sometimes, I've seen teams where you can be too young. And it's like, at the end of the year, you hear somebody saying, well, we were just too young. We didn't do much babysitting, and we appreciated that. And now, because of that, these young guys have earned a lot of trust. Now we got to take it to another level. One thing we tell our guys is, as you gain experience in the game slows down for you. But the way we play it can't slow down. And sometimes that's kind of a balancing act. So we'll talk about it. I think trying to not let the pitch clock get in the way of how you want to play the game. We've already tried to talk to our guys about, like, the first couple weeks. What we want them to do is, because we think we got, like, our pitchers, we think they're pretty good. We don't want them to be panicking about, I got to throw this ball now. So we're going to let them work into it. And then if they have trouble holding runners, then we'll start to talk to them and we'll get more involved. But we'd like to first let them get their feet on the ground and feel like, okay, I got this part out of the way. I don't have to worry about this clock.
And with that, let's welcome in Zack Meisel. He is the Guardians beat reporter for The Athletic. Zack, appreciate you joining us. As always, Terry Francona, it's very well thought out, and the pitch clock in particular with some of the young pitchers, something I didn't really think about, but I love the approach.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it's such an adjustment for everybody watching the game, and there's all these new rules, and it feels like there's a lot to remember, and you're trying to keep track of, okay, how many seconds does the pitcher get in this situation, and when does the hitter need to be alert in the batter's box? I think the thing we forget is a lot of these young players on the Guardians have been through at least some of these new rules coming up through the minor leagues, and their standpoint is, let's just see how this works in spring training and then make adjustments off of that. So we're all frantic trying to figure out how's this going to work and how's this going to work. And the players themselves are pretty calm about it. They don't seem too concerned.
The other thing that was really interesting, and every time Francona has mentioned the success of a season ago, now we have to build on it. And I would imagine that's going to be a recurring message to this team.
Yeah, Dave. I mean, I think the main thing is winning 92 games last season and doing it in the fashion they did with that much youth on the roster. An incredible accomplishment, but it has no bearing on 2023. So individually and as a team, what you did last season doesn't really matter unless you find a way to build on it. So it's interesting because this has been one of the calmer camps with just very few storylines. And it's because they did so much last season. They answered so many questions. There's not as much to sort out this year, but lost in that is the fact that this is still such a young team. And you look around the clubhouse and it's full of 22, 23, 24-year-olds who it's not like they're accomplished veterans and there's absolutely nothing to prove. There's a ton to prove. So in a sense, it's like there's nothing really going on. There's not a lot to figure out, but there's so much still to learn about what everybody, how they can perform on the field.
The other thing that the Guardians did is they went out and signed a big name guy to bat in the middle of that order in Josh Bell. Here is something from Bleacher Report, and it says potential busts of 2023 MLB free agency. As good as Josh Bell is, should be concerning. He doesn't hit the ball nearly as hard as he used to. Bell, his hard hit percentage dipped from 52% in 2021 to 40.8% in 2022 per Baseball Savant. Exit velocity down from 92.5 in 2021, which put him in the top 8% of baseball, to 88.9 last season. I won't argue with any of the analytics. I like the signing. They needed a guy like Josh Bell, a veteran. The other thing is they're eliminating the shift. And when Josh Bell signed, he said that should help him and the Guardians as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to be too much of a bust when you sign a contract that's only going to run for a year or two. But he's a little bit of a mystery because he's had many different types of seasons. We've seen him hit 37 home runs. Last year it was down to 17. But for most of the season last year, he looked like a 300 hitter who draws a ton of walks. And he doesn't strike out a lot, which fits with the mold of this lineup. So I think there are elements there that are really intriguing. And as you touched on, I mean, he admitted there were times when he tried to be a completely different type of hitter because he knew he couldn't just pull the ball into right field and try to beat the defense and get his easy single, because they would stack the infield and they'd have someone playing short right field. And I think, as Jose Ramirez has found out quite often, you can't really beat that defensive shift, but that doesn't exist anymore. So there are more opportunities for him to find holes in the defense. Maybe that opens some things up. I mean, he admitted, and this kind of goes back to the rule change discussion we were just having, that he has to see how teams play him defensively and then make adjustments off of that. And there might be a little feeling out process. But I think the baseline that he gives you, and why I would disagree with maybe his potential to be a bust, is he's a guy who makes contact. That we saw last season what that can do up and down the lineup. And if he hits 20 home runs, great. If he hits 40 home runs, great. But I think the main thing that he'll give you is a high on base percentage and putting the ball in play. And if he does that, I mean, I'm going to assume he's going to bat quite often with Steven Kwan and Jose Ramirez on base. That should lead to some production.
Yeah, and he will drive the ball the opposite way. And again, he fits what this offense does. So I liked the signing. We'll see if it works. But I think it was a really good signing by Chris Antonetti and the Guardians. This is from ESPN.com. Most intriguing player for all 30 Major League teams 2023. With the Guardians, they go Steven Kwan. Hit 298, 373, 489 runs scored. Better than expected rookie season. More walks than strikeouts. Was a throwback to a couple of decades ago, producing nice offense despite not hitting the ball very hard. How impressive was Kwan's rookie season. You know, he had the really good start and then went through a period where he dipped, and then he came out of it and never again dipped, if you will.
That's the amazing part of it, is that how many times do you see a rookie come up, light the world on fire for a couple weeks, and then pitchers make adjustments and you never hear from them again? And Kwan suffered through that like 3-4 week stretch in May, and that was it. He didn't go through another slump the entire season, and this is a rookie who wasn't even supposed to make the opening day roster. So just incredibly impressive. I mean, there are very few players who walk more than they strike out. To do that as a rookie is unheard of. The amount of contact he makes, the plate discipline, the pitch recognition, he's a pest for opposing pitchers. And he proved that you might be able to solve him for a little bit and attack him in a way that makes him think. But he's going to have, I mean, this guy is a master chess player. He plays chess every day in the clubhouse, and it's a perfect metaphor because he's always one step ahead of you.
Yeah, the other thing is his defense with Miles Straw, outstanding. You know, that was plus from center field to left field for the Guardians as well. All right, before we go to break, this from CBSSports.com. 10 most valuable MLB players returning from injuries. They go number 8, Mike Zenino. Sneaky signing by the Guardians as a catcher. Thoracic outlet syndrome surgery. Zenino power. He offers power. 28 home runs per 62 games in his career. Very good defense. The slash not great. 180, 267, 267 batting line from their catchers a year ago. I'm guessing the Guardians will overlook Zenino's strikeout to get more production overall. You know, Zach, again, if he plays really good defense and hits 15, 20 home runs, they're thrilled.
I think that's the formula. I think there are questions about just how much of the load he can handle. He's not a guy who, first of all, catchers don't catch 150 games anymore. And I think like the high end would be like 120, 130 from a lot of catchers. So the question is, can he get you 400 at bats? And do you have a secondary catcher, maybe eventually Bo Naylor, top prospect, who can form a really good tandem? But yeah, he's different from what they've had the last couple of years in that very highly regarded defensively, but at least has the power potential. He's hit 30 home runs in a season before. He's been an all-star. So there's a little more offensively, but unlike Bell, unlike so many guys in this lineup, he's going to strike out. There's going to be a lot of swing and miss. So you're thinking if he hits somewhere around 200 even with 20 home runs, it's a lot better than what they had last season and the season before. So I think they'll take anything they can get there. It's just a question of how does he rebound from the surgery? All systems go so far. He's expected to start their spring opener. So that's a good sign. And then from there, just how healthy can he be all season, and can he hit you a home run every few games? Yeah,
and you mentioned it. Bo Naylor is the ultimate heir apparent to that starting catcher position. Mm-hmm. Zack Meisel from The Athletic and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out outside the break. We'll hear from Chris Antonetti about Mike Zenino, Josh Bell, Bo Naylor. Sports4CLE. We'll be right back talking Guardians. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. We continue talking Guardians, getting ready to open the spring training portion of their season against the Reds this weekend. Chris Antonetti talked about the additions as well as Bo Naylor.
We think Josh is a really good complement to our team as a switch hitter that manages the strike zone well, can fit in the middle of our order somewhere, balances the lineup against both lefties and righties, and provides some protection. So hopefully he can come in and just be the player he's been in the past and help us be a little bit better.
And then at the catching spot, you add Mike Zenino, the veteran there, and more power from that perspective. But you also have Bo Naylor in the mix, and excitement for what his future could bring. So how's the outlook there?
We're really excited about the group of catchers that we have. As we've shared, we prioritize defense from that position, and Mike Zenino comes in with a great reputation as not only really good skills behind the plate, but the rapport he builds with pitchers and the way he leads a pitching staff. And he's already integrated himself in our environment really well and has started building those relationships. So we think he'll be a really good contributor for us this year. And with Bo, he's got great potential, and we think he will have a chance to go on and have a great major league career. Exactly when that timeline starts, we'll have to see, but he's putting in all the work right now to make that happen.
And Zach, when you talk about Bo Naylor, the fact that he was on the playoff roster a season ago shows you how much they think of him. They did that, one, because he could contribute. Two, they want him to get used to that atmosphere.
Exactly. And think about the strides he made in a calendar year where 2021 season was a nightmare. I think he hit about 180. And for a minor leaguer who you have the hype, you were a first round pick, you were considered a top prospect from the get-go, and then you have a season like that, and it's natural to just try to solve everything all at once and put a ton of pressure on yourself. And he had a key hit in their playoff run that the organization thought kind of served as the perfect springboard into his offseason and gave him confidence. It was a reminder that we still think the world of you. You're a good player. And in 2022, there was nothing he did any other way than exceptional. I mean, he hit for average. He drew a ton of walks. He didn't strike out. He hit for power. He stole bases, made strides defensively. So he worked his way up from AA to AAA. And they thought he earned a little bit of a taste of the majors, and more than anything, knock off some of those firsts, or some of the anxiety that comes with being in the major leagues for the first time. So he didn't get into a playoff game. He didn't get to stand up in the batter's box at Yankee Stadium with the season on the line or anything, but just being around the team and the coaching staff and being able to soak up all of the information and see how things work on a day-to-day basis, they felt was invaluable. Yeah. And so that when he comes up at some point in 2023, it's easy. That transition is no problem at that point.
We've alluded to it. What are some of the bigger questions in spring? There aren't a lot because they answered them last year. It's one of the youngest teams in baseball still, and it's got like 7 of the top 100 prospects waiting to try to fight their way up into the big leagues.
They're in a good spot. You still have to produce on the field and answer those questions. The one to me is the starting rotation. And I think you have a pretty good idea of what Shane Bieber and Tristan McKenzie and Cal Quantrill are going to give you. But, Aaron Savali was on and off the injured list last season and never really got his footing. And Zach Plesac has had a couple years in a row where just hasn't been able to put it all together. So can those two be the best versions of themselves? And if not, who's next? Because as you mentioned, they have one starting pitcher after another. A lot of guys who debuted last season, but then also some pretty well-regarded prospects behind them. And what's the pecking order there? And how long of a leash do Plesac and Savali have? And if it's mid-June and one of those guys isn't performing, who gets the call? So I think sort of the hierarchy of starting pitching is maybe one of the bigger questions this spring, which feels weird to say because it seems like the rotation is year after year the backbone of the team.
Who do you think could have a surprise year or a bounce back year for the Guardians where they kind of, open some eyes?
I mean, Savali could fit that. It's weird. He had a 3.24 ERA over his last 14 starts last season. The problem with that is that the 14 starts took place between mid-May and early October. You should be making 30 starts in that stretch. So he never was able to get in a rhythm, and a lot of freak injuries, which in a way is a good thing because it was nothing structural. You're not worried about his shoulder or his elbow or anything. So I know he trained over the offseason a little differently to sort of be in a position where those little nagging things might not pop up as much. And we saw in 2021, Bieber was injured McKenzie was struggling. Savali was the anchor of that staff until late June when he had a random freak finger injury. So he's proven he can be that guy. And if he is, I think that helps elevate this rotation.
Yeah, I would agree, without question. Before I let you go, this from MLB.com. Reasonable goals for every MLB team in 2023. Guardians win the division. The Guardians won their first postseason series since 2016 last year. That is not nothing. But as much as we'd like to swing here and say ACLS, American League Championship Series, or bust, Cleveland needs to establish itself as the top team in the AL Central before we start getting cocky here. And that's a fair point. Zach, I would agree. Win the division. The Twins are probably going to be a little bit better. You never know with the White Sox. But if they can win the division, and again, Young, play like he did last year and try to improve on it.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't a one-year project. They're set up pretty well to be a contender for years to come. There is one little thing hanging over the team, and that's maybe a 75-year championship drought. So since they made the run last year, I'm sure there are many people screaming at us right now saying World Series are bust, and it's hard to argue that given the history. But I think you want to be in a position where you can say year after year for the next, 5-6 years, they have one of the best farm systems in baseball and such a young major league roster that they should be in a position where the expectations are super high for the foreseeable future and that doesn't change. And so if your Oscar Gonzalez doesn't pan out in right field this season, you have other people waiting in the wings who can be the answer. I think this year we can say ALCS or bust or World Series or bust, but more conceptually, it's, I think, about making sure you have answers at every single spot on the roster, because this team should be in a position to win a World Series here at some point in the next several years.
Yeah, I would agree. And you know what? They were a whole lot fun to watch, and the way they play the game, it will be fun, again, to watch the Guardians. Without question. As a guy that sees it night in and night out, it's fun to watch.
2021 season was mind-numbing at times. It was a really bad brand of baseball. But watching the way that they ran the bases, went first to third, stole bases, and they played clean baseball. They had a good defense. They pitched well. It was a refreshing brand of baseball. You don't see that contact and run like crazy sort of style across the league very often anymore. And I think it's going to be encouraged or prioritized even more this season with some of the rule changes with the defensive alignment restrictions, with bigger bases, encouraging stolen bases and things like that. So I would think that it would be another season where it's actually refreshing and enjoyable to watch, and you're not seeing a ton of walks and strikeouts and home runs.
I agree with you. Zack Meisel from The Athletic, thanks so much for the time and the insight. Appreciate it very much, Zach.
Anytime, Dave. Thanks.
All right, Zack Meisel. Make sure you check him out. Athletic, always really good stuff on the Cleveland Guardians, the beat reporter for The Athletic. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We will see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.